Hi everybody, welcome to our next Sona webinar. Today is our first hospitality event. I'm really excited to be joined with the lovely Paul Watson from Sona and Hannah Swarbrick from East Coast Concepts. We're going to be talking all about retention in hospitality today with a bit of a focus on competitive advantage. So just a couple of things in general housekeeping before we get started. All the opinions that are expressed today are the speaker's own. We're also going to be having the chat and the questions tab open on the right-hand side. So please do chat, say hello, ask questions. We'd love to get your feedback as we go and get your input. Otherwise, we're also going to have a couple of polls running throughout the session to keep it more engaging for you. So please do answer those as they pop up on your screen. Otherwise, I'm going to pretty much just hand over to Paul and Hannah to take over the session. Paul is kind of going to run the session for us today. And yeah, if anyone's got any questions as we go, please feel free to use the chat function. Great stuff. Paul, do you want to do your intro first?
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Holly. So as Holly mentioned, this is the first in a series of webinars where we're looking at helping operators gain the competitive advantage. And as mentioned, very much looking at how you retain that talent, that precious talent that you have within your organization, and actually surface that talent as well and understand who your rising stars are. So Hannah and I have known each other for a good few years, and I've had the good fortune of seeing her almost viral video when she was trying to record a message for her team, which was just amazing. And if you haven't seen it, please do search that out because it's great. But I think Hannah, for me, is one of those operators out there who really have a good sense of what it means to look after your team and how important it is to make sure that your team feel valued and accepted in your organization. So, Hannah, do you want to briefly introduce yourself and how you got to where you are today? It'd be great to know more about you.
Yeah, the key is briefly. I can ramble on about this story forever because it's definitely not a linear story. I think currently I'm essentially a standalone HR manager for a group called East Coast Concepts, who operate 2 brands centrally. We also assist in the operations of a London brand, which we're hoping to help roll out. We've currently got about, I think we're on 290 employees in ECC and growing. Both brands are in growth, one quicker than the other. So great position to be in as a business. My story is operational background. If you really wanted to go way back when, it started in business development in marketing. So I sort of went down that route, found out quite quickly I wasn't very good at the creative side of things. Well, the designing doing, but was still quite creative, and ended up finding my way via business development, building on relationships in the design world and really enjoyed it. And then that started kickstart my adult career in hospitality through business development. And yeah, I think I'd switched after a short stint in Thailand. I switched to operations at one of the probably most popular bars, restaurants in Manchester at the time, a place called Neighbourhood in Manchester, and quickly went through the ranks from kind of duty manager to assistant general manager. And then thankfully to my mentor, now mentor, new MD at the time, who kind of plucked me out of an operational position and said, because I was kind of calling for something different, realized quite quickly that operations wasn't my gig. I loved working with my team, loved giving them opportunities to grow and challenge themselves, but I just didn't see myself as a GM. So he gave me the opportunity to start our in-house people program. We've never had one before. So over the last 4.5 years, I've been building that from the ground up.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks for that. It's always really interesting. And Hannah and I spoke last week about hospitality and in general, and just how, as a sector, you see this or hear about these stories of people who just move from what could be considered like an entry-level role and then really find their pathway and their journey through the sector. I shared a story when I started working with hospitality businesses a good sort of almost 2 decades ago, and hearing that story from waiter to team manager to regional manager up into HR, and it's not always that really sort of obvious path.
Not at all.
It's, you know, it can meander, it can get to sort of different areas, but there still feels like, and, you know, just again, interested on your thoughts, this feeling that the hospitality sector is still a bit of a stopgap sector, and, you know, people aren't necessarily going into it purposefully. They're landing in it, but then they're finding something. And do you think that's still alive today?
Absolutely. I think it's quite clear that, I know we're going to talk about Brexit and COVID, touch on it, not that we'll continue going down that narrative, but we have to. Not just the impact of that, but I think what that has shown is it's obviously left us with a very, very obvious skills gap. And it's not that there's not enough people to fill the roles, it's people that want to be in hospitality. And then it's about how do we entice and make it attractive. And I know that Hospitality Rising and a lot of businesses are really trying to change the way that they do that. That attraction piece is becoming really important. But I think the other, like we've just touched on then, when there's because people see it as a stopgap, you're getting a lot of students that are highly intelligent, that you could really harness and showcase how they could develop those skills that they've got or that they're already starting to show interest in, and show them how they could be applied to a career in hospitality. I just don't think that we showcase enough about the career opportunity. Like would have had no idea that I could have ended up as essentially head of people, HR manager in this industry. I just would not have known that. I don't think it's clear from at any point in that journey.
It's funny, isn't it? It's almost like it's a job someone picks up because they're at university and it's, you know, it's paying for their lifestyle, or they finish university and they've done their course in bioengineering or statistical mathematics, someone was telling me the other day, and they're almost at that, right, well, I need to now get a job, and they get a job, and then they're like, what do I do? You know, while I decide where do I go in the future, I'm just going to go and work in the local pub or the restaurant or the hotel, whatever it might be. And then they just find this great journey. So you find these people who have gone through these intense education sort of sessions and degrees and things, who then can use that in a very different way. But I think also that approach to learning and that approach and dedication to, you know, achieving something really helps in that sector. And it is frustrating. You know, we spoke about this before, where I think it's almost like it's almost too late when someone's at university to then start educating about hospitality. It needs to be earlier so that people make that transition into it.
I was just going to touch on that. I think you mentioned quite a few kind of key, highly academic university degrees there. I think from when I was at uni, in all honesty, I was lucky to find a course that I genuinely enjoyed, but I know and I actually got a career off the back of it, but I know a lot of my peers didn't. They kind of did a course they were kind of interested in and did nothing with it after, and got the debt that they've got off as a result. And I think when they put the cost up, I think that made people really seriously consider what they're getting out of higher education. So I think people in uni now are genuinely there to study something that they're seriously passionate about. So they're hard to convert. Yeah. So like you say, it's less about people that come in there. They're always going to be really imperative to the hospitality industry, because seasonal staff are literally, they help get your headcount to where it needs to be in peak services, but they're able to leave when you don't need them. So it means you can have a core, stable team. So they're absolutely imperative. But again, when we touch back on educating them earlier, if we got into schools, colleges, before they made that, you know, if people weren't feeling like they wanted to go down a really highly academic route, they knew that there was another option, whether it's through apprenticeships in hospitality or whether it was through just starting from scratch and finding your own way. I think the key is really, really getting to those early educational stages and letting them know that this is a viable option. And plus, the money that you can make in hospitality is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny actually, and I'm not going to put you on the spot for statistics, but seasonal work, what percentage do you think those seasonal workers make up for East Coast?
For us, I think, look, it's peaks and troughs, but it would be probably about 70%.
Wow.
Because if you think about the troughs, low trading months are generally sort of early spring, and like that October time, because you're always going to get, especially if you've got outdoor terraces, you're going to have high peak trading in summer and obviously throughout festive seasons. So you need to just be able to run on skeletal staff. And normally you want to prioritize full-timers because it is their chosen career. They're not doing anything else. And so, yeah, it's 60, 70%, I'd say, as a guess. I mean, you put me on the spot there.
Yeah, sorry. I know. I didn't mean to do that. You mentioned about the pandemic and Brexit, because I know they feel like there's something that sort of happened, and we're hopefully sort of seeing the end of it. There are some headlines recently about, are we going to see another resurgence, etc. And I'm just pretending it's not happening. But I think what was interesting with Brexit, because of course one of the mainstays of the hospitality workforce in the UK were European workers. Who they were so widely accepted within hospitality, with restaurants and pubs. And when Brexit took place, it was almost a little bit clouded over by the fact that the pandemic came in so quickly, and that workforce depletion wasn't necessarily the impact wasn't felt until everything started to reopen. Have you found, I mean, you alluded to the fact that it's a different workforce. What does that feel like now for you? How does that feel now that we're out of that pandemic world?
I think, God, it was, I think when we caught up last week, it was certainly the stinging points were Brexit had already started to happen, lockdown happened, furlough didn't cover trunk, so income was really stretched. Yeah. So a lot of the people that were European that were already on a deadline anyway just thought, well, I'm going to go and be in lockdown with my families at home. So you didn't even have went into a lockdown for all your staff and came out with a massive hole. And then also in a position where there was just not a lot of movement. If you remember, when everything first reopened, people were too nervous to go anywhere or do anything. They didn't know what was going to happen. So great for retention, but it also meant that you're then stuck with this big gap of skills. So I think that first year was just so reactive. I think everybody in my role, I can remember talking to my peers, and everyone was a bit like, "Oh my God!" Every day you're kind of thinking, "What? Anything could happen." It was just unknown was the word of the month, wasn't it? So of the year, really. So fast forward a couple of years, I think what's fantastic is that particularly people in my job role have been able to be really creative, flip things on its head, question status quo, what we've done forever, and kind of go, is that necessary? Do we need to do that? All in aid of keeping the people that we've got in the business and really, really trying to hold on to them. So what we found, again, touching on that skills gap, was it was more difficult to get people in. Europeans' biggest trade is tourism. One of their biggest trades is tourism. So that is a career for them, hospitality, which is why there's so many the best tenure employees. A lot of them will be from overseas because that is a genuine career for them. So without that passion and that, commitment gone from your team, it's then, okay, so how do we entice English nationals to come into this when they've never considered it before? And how do we get them to go, it's not, you don't get paid nothing. You don't do 15, 16 hours and you go, actually, our teams do. Oh God, we have to stop that. It's looking at how do we change to attract a whole different audience that we've not really had to rely on so much before. So I think, it's in line with the topic, isn't it? It's I think now businesses have done, those who have survived, what they've done is really challenge themselves to change the way that they looked after their people and change the way that they design their working days, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was an article last week that came out. They think there was a million workers left the UK or have left the UK since Brexit and since the pandemic. I mean, conflicting stories, because others say that immigration's higher than it's ever been, but it's a different group. And you touched on their recruitment, because I think that's really interesting. I was talking to an operator yesterday, and they were saying what's quite interesting is that whilst we look at Brexit and we look at the pandemic and everyone's sort of that movement piece, also there was 2 years of people that would have probably gone into hospitality and done that as their their first job maybe, or their Saturday job, and working those Fridays and Saturdays and nights that just didn't happen.
Yeah.
And you're now recruiting a workforce who have never had that exposure before, and they're not used to it. And I don't think that's just hospitality. That is, that's every vertical and every sector. But it was really interesting to hear them talking about, well, you're just recruiting people that have no, like, product knowledge is so much lower. The experience is lower. And actually, if you look at this generation, they're probably not as interested in going out and drinking. They're more about self-improvement. They're probably in the gym more than, certainly I am, but certainly, our generation might have been. And I just wondered whether or not this is just a sign of the times, or is it a lull? And actually, as people start to get back into that experience again, because experiential nights out and weekends sort of are booming. And is it because there's just been this period where everything went on hold, and now everyone wants to sort of top themselves up?
I think, I mean, like you say, it's on, when you touched on there, the knowledge, particularly product knowledge, we have noticed the applicants' skill level, or at least awareness around the industry or product, or particularly premium products, are really starting to get less and less. And like you say, I think that is, you could put it down to, and my own opinion, you could put it down to the fact that there was less exposure, in the sense that they couldn't go out and enjoy hospitality. Even things like, the financial crisis, people haven't got the money to go and actually consume all these things anymore. Not anymore, but not as often. And they're not able to go and try new things maybe. And even that develops a kind of knowledge and a foundation of understanding of what is the offer in hospitality. So I think that, coupled with, you touched on it again there, the low and no alcohol consumption, which has become a big thing, more diets, less, just food, health conscious nutritions. And the newer generations as well, I think they're going to be an absolute force to be reckoned with. So it's understanding adaptation. You've got to be so adaptive now, and you've got to really, really be quite agile, I think,
and that. Yeah, and so one of the interesting things, because obviously working with different HR teams through both pre-Brexit and pandemic, and then post, it feels like HR teams were in the highest regard and demand, because they had access to this sort of business critical information, and it was needed much more than ever before. Whereas traditionally everyone's looking at, profits, operating profits, etc. Now it's, gone to how are we going to keep this resource? Because recruitment's costing us a fortune, and, are we paying fairly? Are we competitive in the marketplace? Has any of that slowed down since, I guess, the sort of micro focus that was around the whole furlough piece, or is it now as important as it was a year and a half ago?
I think if you ask different people that question, you'd have different answers, because I think I think that we are on an upward trajectory, in the sense that this role has absolutely increased. The awareness of the role's value has increased. I think that because of what happened in the pandemic, it was natural that all that, we suddenly had to step into the forefront and was like, this is how we can really, add value to the business and be effective, particularly for cost saving, and not just, the fluffy stuff, as it's called a lot. It's really, really impactful to the business to lower the lower turnover, build retention. So I think it challenged HR people to become more commercially aware, to understand how they impact the business from a financial aspect, because that then got buy-in from the senior leadership team. So that educated us, or forced us into that kind of position. Also becoming more data centric and understanding how to utilize your data to project what your next steps are, rather than just kind of going, I think, that business is doing that, so I'm going to do that, and being really hyper focused on what is genuinely best for your business and your team. And I think because HR got put on that development fast track themselves, yes, it's made the profile of the role much where it needs to be. It needs to be seat at the table, board level, absolutely. I think that the financial crisis has slowed some of that in a sense, because I think that budgets have become back, obviously budgets come back into the forefront and go, right, everything needs to be stripped. And unfortunately, I do hear still quite a lot that HR is one of those first budgets that gets brought back, because again, it's seen as fluffy stuff, reward, nights out, team stuff. And it's only the real industry leaders that are investing in that and not cutting it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That word fluffy. I mean, before getting into hospitality, my background is as a learning development consultant, and my skill set really was around communication and interview skills. And even that was like, oh, it's fluffy training. It was like, it's so such a strange word. And now, if you think about it, it's like it underpins everything. If you can communicate well, if you can, understand and listen and hear what's actually going on in business, like that is so important, because the really good ambassadors are the employees that are happy, are the ones that are delivering your brand on a day-to-day basis. And if they're not listened to, and they're not, that unfortunately it feels like, from what operators are saying, it's quite easy to just sort of move it on the road and get a job elsewhere if you don't feel valued.
People are begging for your people, especially the good ones. So you've got to be obsessed about the employee experience and understanding everything that encompasses. And that sounds like a really broad term itself, but it actually only covers about 5 or 6 really hyper-focused areas. So it's about, again, not applying all these, I'm not spitting out theories and things for people to just take on board, but that's what's really worked for us as a business. I started to really understand what does employee experience mean, what are the touch points, and how do we really change that dial in a positive way and make a real impact day to day. So it's not just we did that thing that last year that worked. It's no, that happens consistently, regularly. We speak to our people, we offer training programs, we check in on them, we whatever it is, I could go on and on, but that employee experience, I think, is a real key thing that we need to be looking at.
And do you think that's calmed down? I mean, when everything started to reopen, there was quite ruthless poaching of staff and talent. Has that calmed a little bit, or
It's funny you say you do a poaching, because when I ever talk about poaching to my teams, they all get a bit of a shudder because they know how it feels. So I think it's always going to happen. It leaves a sour taste in everyone's mouth once it's happened, if you're the people who've been poached from. But I was trying to do a bit of a change tactic on it. But look, reality is, if they want to, people want to leave because you're not ticking a box. So yes, you're not going to tick every box. There's some things you'll lose out on. And if you've lost out on it because you genuinely couldn't provide it, like pay, for example, not everyone can be competitive on pay. That's fine. If you can't be competitive with pay, just make sure that you are giving them the best time when they're in there. Like if they're genuinely enjoying themselves, and they come into work, they feel listened to, they get fed, or they get opportunity to go and be fed elsewhere, or, just the really simple human needs. If you really understand them and make that part of your employee experience proposition, then pay doesn't even come part of it. So
yeah, I agree.
I think when you start looking into your turnover and start understanding why people are leaving, that'll be a really good insight to start with, to try and see how are people getting poached. And if it is constantly going to better competitors, then you need to start looking at doing an analysis and finding out what they're offering that you want, and not necessarily saying, oh, I need to do that then. It's going, well, just understanding what your USP is. And I think that was something that we're still, I'm not saying we're perfect at that either. We're still going through that process. I think it's going to be something that happens continuously. You should always look at stuff like that. But I think poaching is never going to stop. But why whinge about poaching? Look at what you can do to improve it, learn from it.
Yeah, really good point. Greg has asked a good question in the chat. And funnily enough, it was something I was going to start talking about, because, with all this poaching, of course, you want to recruit and backfill. You mentioned earlier Hospitality Rising and Mark McCulloch. They've seen some really exciting numbers and improvements since they've launched. Greg asked about how do you get the younger generation excited about hospitality? And interestingly, where we talked about earlier, it is a different generation, self-improvement, etc. What they have seen is that the movement or the increase in numbers of Gen Z has moved from initially when they launched 1 in 5 considering working in hospitality to 2 in 5 because of how they're positioning it, because of, it's not, I don't want to keep saying it's stopgap because that feels really unfair, but it is something that is, you can come and make a career and it's cool and it's, you make loads of friends and you can explore and learn so much. What do you think? What do you do to introduce or excite younger workers, or is there no magic in a bottle, unfortunately?
Oh my God, there is no. If I could wave a wand, you'd give. I don't want to sit here and say that you do this, and do that, and that will equal this, because it's just not the case. I think there's some businesses that are set up for new generations because they've already got to a position where they're probably a bit more agile. We're not personally there yet. We've still got a lot of work to do in order to be more adaptable. We're not static. We are actually quite good, but there's always more to do. I mean, that's probably the perfectionist in me. But I think first and foremost, find out what the younger generations want, and I think what we can quite confidently say is they're going to want tech is going to be featured really highly. It's going to have to be a really simple process. They want collaboration, so it's not all about remote. It's not about everything being online. They still want to be part of something and have that team collaborative approach. They want to feel like they're part of the solution as well. So again, if you think of just those things that I've just said there, what does that really mean? Okay, so how do you communicate? How often are you communicating? Do you give them a chance to come together? What does your tech journey look like from a user perspective? And are you making it easy to access? I think I could just spit those bits off, and that would be a good starting point.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because engagement kind of came to life 6-7 years ago, and I think some of some businesses felt, this is something we need to do, but they didn't necessarily have a cohesive plan about what or how they were going to do it. I think it was one of those sort of like, it was the buzzword. It was let's jump on. I don't want to say like jump on a wagon, but they were excited about doing something, but didn't really know how to turn it around. I think engagement has evolved over the last few years because it's not just that communication thing. I think to your point about tech, and this isn't in any way salty, but it's the how do people know about when they work, and how do people they just getting them more invested in you as a organization, and what's my career path? Where do I get to? So it's one thing to say, hey, come and join hospitality, but if I'm joining for that role, what could that role turn into in 5, 6, 7 years time?
I think there's a lady that I'm really lucky to call my mentor, Jo. Jo. She's a really successful tech business herself in hospitality, and she'd kind of touched on something, a term called, a lot of people call it this now, but it was a career map and not a path, because it's just the idea that there's so many different ways it could go in, and it isn't linear like mine. It's just because say someone's in a server role doesn't mean that their only choice is to go to restaurant manager, AGM, GM. Like, what if there's so many ways they could end up going and routes they could take. So it's just, again, coming back to what message are you trying to tell them? Like, what do you want to say? What is your USP? Like, what are they going to experience working for you? How does that look? If you're offering them a career development opportunity, then that's what you need to shout loud about. And this is that and the other. If you're offering them a chance to really develop personally, there might be people that kind of lean into the idea that, look, our training program actually isn't very good. So maybe we just say, we can teach loads of soft skills. People really push confidence building, team work, all that kind of stuff that really kind of just build their own people's individual professional development, to, sets them off to go and do things. Even then, they'll probably end up being a really good get good retention, because people are feeling invested in, even if they stay there for 6 years or not, at least the time they're there, it's probably a little bit longer because they feel listened to and they're getting a lot from it. So
absolutely.
I think, again, you've just got to really do some reflective work and go, what is good? What's the best strategy for our business, and what are we trying to achieve? What experience are we trying to deliver, and go from there? Because even if you look at AI, everyone is wanting to use ChatGPT, and there's a load of people get feeling a bit like stupid if they're not, and it's absolutely not the case. It's not for everybody, and don't think just because it's a tool that you have to use it, because yes, it's going to be phenomenal, literally scratching the surface, and there's so many tools that are coming into play now that are using it. So I think it's just do what's right for the business, not just jumping on a buzzword like you'd called engagement like it was before.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really key. And funnily enough, when you were talking there, it was reminding me of an article that was on LinkedIn many, many years ago. And when I used to talk about engagement, it was likening your job or your career to a relationship. When you go and work or go to look for a company to work for, that first interview is like a first date.
Absolutely.
And, you're looking at your personal values. Are they mirrored in the person you're working with? And that working on it and that commitment from both parties to make it work is absolutely important. It can't just be the employee that's turning up and is just 15-hour shifts 3 days a week. It has to be to and fro, and
definitely.
Comms obviously is I think the adage or the linear description they gave was that if you look at careers and you look at relationships, they break down when communication breaks down. Like it's the first thing to cause problems.
And I think, look, you even go right back to the start of the employee journey and look at that recruitment process. I think that's become a hyper focus of most businesses now, because it was taking, I think when we first looked at it, our figures were just so embarrassing. Like it was above 20, sometimes in some occasions it was above 20 days from application to hire. Why on earth are we taking 20 days to give somebody a job? Why? Like what on earth is causing such a delay? So we literally had to rip everything up and go, right, this needs, what is it? A lot of things, what boiled down to was our system wasn't working for us. The processes and templates that we had in place were actually adding additional steps, which are delaying the process. So everyone was being, leaning into the process that we're given in the guidance, but that in itself was causing it to take too long. And then there was a lack of confidence in our management team to make decisions, in the hiring process, like, yes, I want this person. Even if they're a restaurant manager, they felt that they had to then go and get a second opinion of the general manager before they could hire them. And we started to say, well, why? They're a manager because they've been trusted with this department and they know what fits with their team. So this absolutely should be up to them, and we need to be empowering that. So I think even going back to that, looking at what the experience is there, and again, touching on Gen Z, they're not going to want to wait 20 days to hear back. They'll have already 2 weeks into a new job by that point. So you've got to really challenge yourself. We've taken out trial shifts from our process and put in, when they come in for an interview, there's an option. You don't have to. There's an option to do a skills demonstration, and we manage expectations before then, and kind of say, look, you might be asked to do a skills demonstration. Please bring this, wear this, whatever. And it's literally 3 simple checkpoints in any department that shows them that they would be skilled for that role, because our interviews are now purely based on competency, fit for culture, and just get an understanding of that person. So that's working much better for us now. It's not like golden goose we're fixed. It's just work in progress.
That is so interesting. I think that attracting the right candidates and getting the right candidates and finding a way that, because everything's so instant now for individuals, you can do everything so fast. You can probably book a holiday quicker than you could apply for a job at the moment. Like it's so quick to click a few buttons, and that's what all those people out there, they want to interact with work products, business products in that way, in that vein. So it feels like it mirrors, it's quick, it's sometimes probably a little bit too fast, because some people are so used to getting things instantaneously. You don't sort of sit there and think, right, I like this series on Netflix. You don't wait till the next week anymore. You just watch them all in one go.
Me and Ian watch them because we can binge it. So
that's the thing. And it's like people have now got into that lifestyle of everything has to be instant. It's instant feedback. It's instant. But to some of that, do you think it's I don't want to sort of push on to like generations and people, because I think it's just behavior. Typically everyone changes. I know I would have inherited some of that behavioral stuff as well, but do you think now that's maybe why there is a change in requirements for new employees? Like talking to some of the operators, they feel that some of the new starters are far more expectant of really quick progression, and it's not a, hey, I've been identified. It's almost a, I've been here 12 months. What's the next thing for me? Do you feel that? And hard, because I don't want to put that on any of your employees, but it feels that there's something that is shifted where I would never have, I don't think, asked for a promotion until I was offered a promotion, when I was younger. But it feels now people are wanting to grab it more.
Yeah, I think, rightly so. If they're invested and they want more, they want progression, I think I don't know whether people agree, but I think influencers, the idea that social media has obviously completely changed the way that we view work in a sense as well. Like, so people see younger generations now are growing up seeing influencers making fortune. Yes, they're doing a lot. I'm not going to challenge their work ethic, but they are doing their bit in a different way, whatever. So I think what they see is people can get rich quick. They're not seeing all the hard work in the background. So I'm wondering whether, again, I've got absolutely no evidence to this. I'm wondering whether they kind of think, oh, they can do it, so that it must be easy to climb the ranks. It must be easy. I don't know whether there's this idea that progression is easy, or it's the employer's duty rather than theirs. There is something, you're absolutely right. We've noticed it in a few of our teams that kind of feel, I'm not regularly, to be honest, but there've been a couple of occasions where they've kind of gone, well, if I'm not getting progressed and I'm leaving, you go, well, what have you done to progress yourself? Where are you at? When we knew they weren't ready for the role, but they felt so empowered to demand that progression. So it's a bit like, okay, I love that energy, but let's put you on a path that will get you there. And a lot of the time you can retain them by going, we'll give you this is your plan for 6 months, and this is how we do it, and give them real clear direction. I think that's probably where that comes from. That I want it is because they don't know how to get it. And I think this is when we can link it back to tech, particularly in a learning and development platform discussion. Is your learning and development platform allowing for people to kind of choose their route and learn and pull down on new things constantly? Are you giving them enough to kind of appease that appetite? Because a lot of people will have it and won't know where to go, and that's when they're demanding more from you, because you're not giving them the kind of freedom or tools, maybe.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're right. I mean, the social media space itself is, I think, fantastic in so many ways, but also very dangerous. Individuals don't see the failures. They don't see the sleepless nights. They don't see the tears. They just see the person who, hey, I've launched this, and now, I've got a jet. And they can paint whatever picture they want to in whatever timeline they want to as well. So there is this, I guess, this mirroring or replication of surely that's me then. I should do that.
The boom of entrepreneurs, isn't it? Everyone on Instagram it looks like they're
an entrepreneur. Yeah.
So it's like everyone suddenly got this idea that they need to should be in that kind of echelon. So it's just, I get it. I feel so sorry for them. All this pressure to be something and do something now. Bless them. So I think if you look at that, I mean, all you can see is a hunger. At least there is hunger there.
Yeah, and then you were talking about training, actually. That's really interesting, because it's always been an interesting part for me. When I first got into hospitality, and as I say, soft skills trainer, to suddenly get into a point of working with people who are in a sector, who don't necessarily join a sector because they want to use technology. When I first started back, as I say, 2 decades ago, it was how do you make this interesting and exciting? And still, I think people are far more digitally native now. They've grown up with technology. We've had 15 iPhones, 13 iPhones, however many there have been. And it's how people interact almost 90% of the day. But in terms of training and learning and development, there's loads of great platforms out there. If it's Sideways or whatever it might, there's just these really cool pieces of tech. Does the hands-on approach still hold a place? That face-to-face
100%.
interaction.
100%. I think I was at a summit held by my pal actually in London a few months ago, and they had a big feature on tech and how it's going to impact the hospitality industry. And I think a lot of operators will gasp and think, God, and think serving by robots. And it's not that. It's about utilizing systems, like you say, places like Sideways were fantastic, and adapting it, but absolutely face to face, particularly learning development, really, really holds key is key to hospitality in particular, because I think there's been more and more noise about neurodiversity now as well. And I think it was Patrick from So Let's Talk that brought up a statistic that there are more ADHD employees in hospitality than any other industry, because it attracts that kind of learning experience and experience generally. So people who aren't having to sit, but they're not used to sitting, they don't naturally work best if they're sat behind a computer and that kind of stuff. So if you still need to be aware of the diversity within your teams, and make sure that you're allowing for that connection with this, particularly with learning, because people learn in so many different ways. So you can't just assume that you shove something online and they're going to understand it. So you've got to couple that with kinesthetic or whatever. You can go through all that. And I think that face-to-face offline learning is still super, super important for hospitality in particular. We've got a bit of both.
Yeah, I have to say I'm a hugely sort of kinesthetic, hands-on person. I struggled with exams because sitting down and revising from a book was a nightmare for me. It wasn't how I learned at all. I'm sure my teachers would have things to say about that, but it was just like. But then I don't think it was as. It probably was as understood, but it just wasn't as focused. Like you see schools now, the way that they, connect their students with different technologies to help all these different learning facets is astonishing. A question that has come up in there is, what kind of things would you include in a training plan? What do you think is really important to get in there, or is it very bespoke per role?
I would love to get to answer the first question first. Key parts for me are check-ins. So we kind of a regular check-in at the end of each week to see how they're settling in, but with different things. So we have week one. It was more about team and content. So are they getting on with the team? Have they got access to the things they need? Are they feeling like they can learn easily in the first week? And then it's more about, culture, embedding, all that kind of stuff. So I think checking in is really important. I think giving them a clear schedule so they know what's coming down the line. They have to know where the support is throughout. And what I think I don't think we've nailed it yet, but what I introduced in ours was a day in the life of. So they spend.
Okay, yeah.
Say I'm a server. We spend 2 hours shadowing the IS. I'm a server who's joining my business. So I'd spend 2 hours shadowing the dispense bartender, so I know how their job impacts mine. 2 hours shadowing the host on duty, so I know how their job impacts mine. 2 hours on the pass, so I understand the kitchen and how that impacts me. And just to give a bit of a broader insight to how they fit into the rest of the team. So again, I say it is part of our process. I'm not convinced it's working 100% yet, but we'll get there.
I really like the concept though, because you're say self-involved, but you're so centered on what you're doing and making sure you do it well. You don't know the impact it's having on the other teams, and actually if you just don't deliver that the way it's meant to be delivered, the ramifications can sort of.
Empathy is such an important skill to have if you're working as part of a team and if you're going to be successful in anything. So I think it's that was sort of what I was trying to harness in that.
A final thing, Holly has reappeared on my screen, but a final question I had to ask for you. You mentioned mentoring earlier, and Joe, and obviously you have recently got involved in Otterlo, which sounds fantastic. I've been looking into it. How did that come about? How did you get involved in that? And talk about training and mentoring, where you see the sort of the crossover and the differences.
Okay, so I came across Atono in LinkedIn actually, and just thought, God, I would have loved that, especially when I was going through management and operations, because at the time I was the only female manager in our business, so it was very new for them and new for me in how to have the right conversations, say the right things, dress the right thing, you know, all the little things that are now so back in history that you probably don't even really consider anymore. But just I wanted somebody to guide me through those conversations. I think that would have been really useful. And also from a career perspective, to explain this was an option for me, and I probably could have done it way sooner. But I think I just wanted to give that opportunity to somebody to kind of learn from my experiences and just share, or even just to have a sounding board, you know, to just go, I'm thinking, what do you think? How do I get to there? I've actually recently started mentoring a friend of a friend who has got a really similar story to me, actually. She's currently restaurant manager and wants to get into my role, and is really keen to understand how she does that. So I just kind of said, well, look, I'm more than happy to mentor you through that. And it's really nice to see somebody start to visualize that this is an option, and next steps don't suddenly, what seemed so kind of scary and too far out of reach now just seems quite achievable, because it's, you know, you break it down to short, small steps.
Yeah, I think that's the other day I had a coach. I suppose it's the same thing, isn't it? A coach, a mentor, like different phrases, but similar things. A guy called Graham Barry years ago when I worked for Orange, and I think the thing that he described to me in the way that I really understood it, because it was way back at the beginning of my career into sort of training and learning and development, and he was just saying, look, I'm going to help you get from point A to point Z, but I'm not going to tell you the direction. I'm just going to show you how to read the map.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was quite happy meandering, but it would have taken me twice as long if he had not just said that these are you're like, you're going to fall down a gap there, like just move that way. And I think that's, you know, it's so important that the soon to be launched, in autumn, isn't it, these boot camps for hospitality that the government are going to launch. And you just think, I don't think that's going to solve this challenge. I think it's the how do you make the sector really exciting for a really wide audience, not we're going to almost, you know, these are the people that aren't contributing economically to our society, so we'll push them through a boot camp. When it just feels like a punishment rather than an exciting output.
Yeah, I mean, the terminology itself doesn't lend itself to, oh, look at how it kind of says, come and get drilled and then we'll spit you back out. So I think, and also it suggests that the issue is a lack of skills, and that's not the case. We aren't scientists. Exactly. We are serving food and drink. We're trying to make people have a really good time whilst they enjoy food and drink, and that really doesn't take, I mean, it's a skill to communicate. So I think what we're teaching people is a lot more soft skills than actual serving food and drink. So I'm not sure. I think coming back to sort of the training bit as well, I think if what we're trying to look at is harnessing that and understanding how do you incorporate soft skills into your training plan, because it's not just about, this is our sequence of service, this is our menu, this is our allergens, this is our way of working. It's like, ugh, everyone's doing that. So how do you kind of go, you do this because I'm going to teach you sales techniques because you're going to try and upsell to the guest. You know, there's little things, understanding that. But yeah, this boot camp, I mean, I'm disagreeing it before I ever even know all the details, so I won't do that. But I don't think it's the answer.
Yeah, fair enough. Right, so Holly's obviously there to police us in some way, shape or form.
Okay. Yeah, no, I feel like that's a nice place to kind of stop, if that's okay, guys.
Yeah,
thank you so much for your time. We will be sharing the recording tomorrow morning with everyone that's registered. So if you've missed it, you can catch up. Otherwise, thank you both so much for your time, and thanks for such an interesting conversation. And yeah, absolutely look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you,
Holly.
Later.
And thank you, Hannah, so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Take care. Speak soon. Bye-bye.